The quantum drive's harmonic resonance felt like a cat purring in Jake Reynolds' chest as the Meridian dropped out of hyperspace. Through the viewport, the Zelothy flagship hung in the void like a living jewel, its biomechanical hull shifting colors from deep sapphire to ethereal silver. Jake pressed his nose against the reinforced glass and whistled low. "Would you look at that thing? It's like someone crossbred a cathedral with a sea anemone." Ambassador Sterling shot him a withering look from across the shuttle's cramped cabin. "Captain Reynolds, might I remind you that this is the most significant diplomatic encounter in human history? Perhaps save the marine humor for the mess hall." Jake straightened his dress uniform and grinned. "Come on, Sterling. When was the last time you saw something that beautiful and didn't want to make a joke? Besides, tension's bad for the complexion." The shuttle's pilot, a nervous ensign named Park, cleared his throat. "Sirs, we're receiving docking instructions. The Zelothy are, well, they're being very specific about approach vectors." "How specific?" Sterling asked, already reaching for his diplomatic protocols tablet. 37 different course corrections, sir. Apparently their ship's neural network needs to approve of our intentions." Jake laughed. "Great. Even their ships are neurotic. I can relate." The docking process took another 20 minutes of delicate maneuvering, during which Jake entertained himself by making increasingly ridiculous guesses about Zelothy culture based on their ship's appearance. By the time they finally sealed against the alien airlock, he'd theorized everything from a society of sentient plants to an empire run by very sophisticated jellyfish. The airlock cycled with a sound like singing crystals, and Jake felt his ears pop as the atmospheric processors equalized pressure. When the inner door dilated open with organic smoothness, they stepped into a corridor that defied every assumption about starship design. The walls curved upward like the inside of a vast nautilus shell, their surface alive with shifting patterns of bioluminescent light. The air itself seemed to shimmer with an almost imperceptible energy field, and Jake could swear he felt the ship's heartbeat thrumming through the deck plates beneath his boots. "Okay," he murmured to Sterling, "I'm officially impressed and slightly terrified." Their escort appeared around the curve of the corridor with fluid grace. 3 Zelothy soldiers, if that's what they were, moved in perfect synchronization. They wore armor that looked grown rather than manufactured, its surface rippling with the same organic patterns as the ship's walls. But it was their faces that made Jake's breath catch. They looked remarkably human, almost disconcertingly so. High cheekbones, pale skin with a subtle luminescent quality, eyes that shifted color from silver to deep blue in the changing light. The only obvious difference was their ears, elongated and elegantly pointed, mobile in a way that suggested they conveyed as much meaning as facial expressions. The lead escort, a woman with hair like spun platinum, inclined her head. "Welcome aboard the Ethereal Dawn. I am Commander Zara. Her Majesty awaits your presence in the primary reception chamber." Her voice carried a musical quality that made Jake think of wind chimes, but there was steel underneath the melody. Sterling stepped forward with practiced diplomatic poise. "We are honored by Her Majesty's invitation. I am Ambassador Sterling, representing Earth's diplomatic corps." "And I'm Jake," Jake added cheerfully, extending his hand. "I represent humanity's inexplicable ability to show up uninvited and somehow make friends." Commander Zara's ears twitched, surprise, amusement. And she stared at his outstretched hand for a moment before cautiously reaching out to shake it. Her grip was firm, her skin surprisingly warm. "Your customs are interesting," she said, and Jake caught the ghost of a smile. "You should see us at birthday parties." They proceeded through corridors that felt more like walking through the chambers of some vast heart. Twice they passed viewports that showed the ship's hull shifting and flowing like liquid metal, adapting to space conditions in real time. Jake couldn't help himself. "So, Commander, on a scale of 1 to completely horrifying, how weird are humans compared to other species you've met?" Zara's ears tilted forward, definitely amusement this time. "Your species is unique in several ways. Most civilizations we encounter have evolved beyond what you might call levity by the time they achieve interstellar travel. Evolved beyond fun. That's terrible. No wonder everyone's so serious out here. Sterling elbowed him sharply, but Commander Zara's smile was becoming more pronounced. Her Majesty has expressed curiosity about this human trait. Your transmission suggested that humor serves a social function beyond mere entertainment. Absolutely. It's how we keep from going insane when faced with the infinite cosmic horror of existence. Jake, Sterling hissed. What? It's true. You think anyone gets through first contact with their sanity intact without cracking a few jokes? They reached a massive archway that pulsed with gentle light. Beyond it lay a chamber that took Jake's breath away. The ceiling soared upward into shadows, supported by what looked like crystalline trees that sang softly in harmonics just at the edge of hearing. The walls were alive with flowing patterns of light that painted everything in shades of blue and silver. And there, at the chamber's heart, stood Queen Lyralii. Jake had seen the diplomatic photographs, of course, but they hadn't prepared him for the reality. She was tall, regal, with the same luminescent skin as her subjects but somehow more refined, as if she'd been carved from moonlight itself. Her hair fell in waves of silver white past her shoulders, and her ears, longer and more expressive than the others, were currently held in a position that Jake was beginning to recognize as formal attention. She wore robes that seemed to be cut from the fabric of space itself, dark material shot through with points of light that moved like slow constellations. When she turned those color-shifting eyes on him, Jake felt a jolt of something that definitely wasn't diplomatic protocol. Your Majesty, Sterling began, dropping into a perfect formal bow. On behalf of Earth and all humanity, we thank you for this historic opportunity. Jake bowed too, though with considerably less precision. Yeah, thanks for not immediately vaporizing us. Always appreciate that in a first meeting. The Queen's ears twitched. Actually twitched. For just a moment, her perfectly composed expression flickered, and Jake caught something that might have been surprise, or amusement, or both. Captain Reynolds, she said, and her voice was like music played on crystal bells. Your reputation for unconventional communication preceded you. All good things, I hope. That remains to be determined. The formal reception proceeded with the kind of careful choreography that diplomatic training had drilled into Jake's bones, but he found himself watching the Queen's ears as much as listening to her words. They were incredibly expressive, shifting position with each emotion that crossed her otherwise serene features. When Sterling began reciting humanity's technological achievements, they tilted backward slightly. Boredom? When Jake interjected a comment about humans being reasonably good at not blowing themselves up, most of the time, they perked forward with what he was becoming convinced was suppressed amusement. Your species fascinates me, Queen Lyralii said during a pause in the formal presentations. In all our travels, we have encountered many civilizations. Some wise, some warlike, some so advanced they barely acknowledge physical reality. But none quite like yours. Is that good or bad? Jake asked. I find myself uncertain. Your psychological profiles suggest a species that uses humor as both weapon and shield, that finds joy in chaos and meaning in contradiction. It should not work, and yet here you are, crossing the void to meet us. Jake grinned. Yeah, we're pretty much held together by coffee, stubbornness, and the cosmic joke that we made it this far without adult supervision. This time, the Queen's ears did more than twitch. They actually flattened slightly, the zealothy equivalent of a suppressed laugh, and Jake felt a surge of triumph. Getting an alien queen to almost laugh had to count as a diplomatic victory, right? The evening's formal dinner promised to be either a complete disaster or the most entertaining diplomatic incident in human history. The neural interface crown felt like wearing a headache made of starlight. Jake adjusted the biometallic circlet for the third time as Queen Lyralii led him through the ethereal Dawn's command nexus, trying not to wince as alien thoughts brushed against the edges of his consciousness. Is it supposed to feel like my brain's being tickled by electric eels? He asked, gesturing at the device that would allow him to communicate with the ship's living computer systems. Queen Lyraliai's ears tilted forward in what Jake had learned was amusement. The neural crown requires adjustment to human brainwave patterns. Your thoughts are more chaotic than our systems expect. Story of my life. I'd been told my thought patterns could scramble a GPS. They stood before the ship's central command interface, a towering spiral of crystalline matrices that pulsed with the rhythm of a massive heartbeat. Tendrils of light danced between the crystals, carrying information at speeds that made quantum computers look like pocket calculators. The air hummed with energy, and Jake could taste copper and ozone on his tongue. The ethereal dawn is not merely a vessel, the Queen explained, her hand resting on a control surface that rippled at her touch. She is a living entity, grown rather than built. Every system responds to neural input, every decision filtered through biological processors that evolved alongside our species. Jake stared at the organic architecture surrounding them. Walls curved like the interior of a vast organism, their surfaces alive with shifting patterns of bioluminescence. So basically, your spaceship is a giant brain with engines? A crude but surprisingly accurate assessment. And you want me to what, exactly? Have a conversation with it? Queen Lyraliai's expression grew serious, though her ears maintained their forward position. The ship's consciousness has expressed curiosity about human neural patterns. In all our centuries of travel, we have never encountered minds that process information quite like yours. The neural crown suddenly flared with warm light, and Jake felt something vast and ancient touch his thoughts. It was like standing at the edge of an ocean and feeling the first wave wash over his feet, except the ocean was made of pure consciousness and had been thinking deep thoughts for longer than humanity had existed. Greetings, small warm mind, asterisk came a voice that wasn't quite a voice, speaking in concepts rather than words. Asterisk you think in spirals and jokes and sudden leaps. Most unusual, asterisk. Jake's instinctive response was to think back, well, you're basically a flying cathedral with a sense of humor, so we're even. The ship's presence seemed to pause, then rippled with something that felt distinctly like laughter. Asterisk cathedral. Yes. I like this word shape. It carries echoes of reverence and grandeur and small beings seeking something larger than themselves, asterisk. This is incredible, Jake said aloud, grinning at Queen Lyraliai. Your ship just complimented my metaphor game. Her ears tilted slightly backward, surprise mixed with something else. The Dawn rarely engages in casual communication. She prefers efficiency in all interactions. The small warm mind amuses me, asterisk the ship interjected. Asterisk his thoughts bounce like light particles in a reflection chamber. Each collision creates new patterns. Most minds think in straight lines. His draws pictures, asterisk. Jake felt a flush of pride. Did I just get a good review from a sentient spaceship? Because that's definitely going on my resume. The Queen gestured toward a viewing alcove where holographic displays showed the ship's various biological systems. Would you like to see how we integrate with her consciousness during navigation? Absolutely. I've been wondering how you managed to pilot something this complex without going insane. They moved to the navigation center, where 3 Zealoty officers sat in meditation poses, their hands resting on crystalline interfaces that pulsed in sync with their heartbeats. Their ears were perfectly still, held in positions of deep concentration. Navigation requires a Gestalt consciousness, the Queen explained. The navigators merged their awareness with the ship's sensory systems, creating a collective intelligence capable of processing the multidimensional mathematics of hyperspace travel. Sounds like the ultimate team project. Do you ever get personality conflicts? Conflicts occur, yes. Commander Thale once spent an entire week convinced that stellar navigation would be improved by incorporating musical harmonics into our course calculations. Jake looked at her with delight. Did it work? Surprisingly, yes. We reduced our hyperspace transit time by 12%. The ship found rhythm to be a useful organizational principle. One of the navigators, a young male with copper-colored hair, opened his eyes and looked directly at Jake. His pupils were dilated, still partially merged with the ship's consciousness. "The Dawn wishes to experience a human navigational perspective," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested the ship was speaking through him. "She is curious about how your species plots courses through three-dimensional space without neural networking." "We mostly just point at where we want to go and hope for the best," Jake replied. "With a lot of math and crossing our fingers." The navigator's ears perked forward. "Math, prayers and hope ritual. Fascinating. Would you demonstrate?" Jake looked at Queen Lyralii, who nodded encouragingly. "I suppose I could show you our basic navigation principles. Fair warning though, human space travel is about 50% science and 50% controlled panic." The ship's neural crown grew warmer as Jake approached the navigation console. The crystalline interface responded to his touch, displaying a three-dimensional star map that hung in the air like a handful of scattered diamonds. He could feel the ship's vast consciousness watching as he began to explain dead reckoning, parallax calculations, and the way human navigators used reference points to plot courses across impossible distances. "Ingenious, the ship whispered in his mind. You compensate for limited processing power with pattern recognition and intuitive leaps. Most inefficient. Also most creative, Thanks, I think," Jake said. "We're really good at making things work despite having no idea what we're doing." Queen Lyralii moved closer, her presence warm beside him. The ship has never praised alien navigation techniques before. Usually she finds other species' methods crude. Well, crude is humanity's specialty. We've turned it into an art form. The navigation console suddenly flared with brilliant light, and Jake felt the ship's attention focus on him with startling intensity. "Small warm mind," it said, "would you show me how humans dream of traveling between stars?" Jake blinked. "You want to see our science fiction? Fiction science. Dreams made of mathematics and wonder." "Yes, This I have to see," Queen Lyralii murmured, her ears tilted forward with unmistakable curiosity. Jake closed his eyes and let his mind wander to every space opera, every wild story of humans jumping between stars in ships held together by determination and spare parts. He thought of generation ships and sleeper vessels, of warp drives and wormhole networks, of the crazy human dream that somehow the universe wanted to be explored, wanted to be filled with laughter and argument and the cheerful chaos of people who refused to stay put. The ship's consciousness rippled with something like delight. Chaos drive and laughter fuel and dreams that ignore physics until physics gives up and agrees to cooperate. Your species navigates by hope and stubbornness, Pretty much, Jake agreed. We looked at the laws of physics and decided they were more like guidelines anyway. The Queen was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Her ears had shifted to a position he hadn't seen before, tilted slightly forward but also angled toward each other, as if she was paying very careful attention to something that surprised her. "The ship has never responded to alien thoughts with such enthusiasm," she said softly. "Your neural patterns are creating resonances in her consciousness that we've never observed. Is that good or bad?" "Good-bad is insufficient concept, the ship interjected. Small warm mind creates harmony discord that makes thinking music. Very interesting. Very strange. I wish to learn more about human dream navigation, Jake grinned and settled more comfortably against the navigation console. This was turning out to be the best diplomatic mission ever, even if he was pretty sure he was accidentally flirting with a spaceship. The emergency klaxon sounded like dying whales having an argument. Jake pressed himself against the bulkhead as another shockwave rattled the ethereal dawn, sending crystalline fragments raining from the ceiling like very expensive snow. "Well," he said, wiping bioluminescent dust from his sleeve, "this is either a really dramatic way to end a diplomatic dinner, or someone's having the worst day in galactic history." Queen Lyralii moved with fluid grace despite the ship's violent shaking, her hands dancing across emergency control surfaces that bloomed to life at her touch. Her ears were flattened against her skull, the Zelothy equivalent of battle stations, Jake had learned. The hyperspace manifold is destabilizing, she said, her voice maintaining its musical quality even under stress. Something has damaged the quantum resonance chamber. In human terms, we're about to fall out of hyperspace into normal space at 17 times the speed of light. Jake considered this. That sounds like the kind of thing that would make us very, very dead. An accurate assessment. Commander Varek burst through the chamber's organic doorway, his usually pristine armor scorched and sparking. His ears were rigidly upright, military efficiency barely containing panic. Your Majesty, the sabotage was precise. They knew exactly which systems to target. The humans were with me when the explosions began, Queen Lyralii cut him off sharply. Direct your suspicions elsewhere, Commander. Jake felt a spike of alarm that had nothing to do with their impending doom. Sabotage? Someone deliberately tried to kill us all. The separatist faction has grown bolder, Varek said, his eyes never leaving Jake's face. They believe your presence here threatens Zelothy purity. Great. Alien racists. Because regular racists weren't challenging enough. The ship's consciousness suddenly flooded Jake's mind through the neural crown he still wore. Asterisk small warm mind, I am damaged. Core matrices failing. Cannot maintain hyperspace transition much longer, asterisk. How long do we have? Jake asked aloud. Time concept, 14 of your minutes before cascade failure, asterisk. Queen Lyralii's hands moved across the control surfaces with desperate precision. I can stabilize the quantum field temporarily, but we need to reach the primary repair bay. The ship's auto-repair systems can compensate for the damage if we can give them time to work. And the catch is? The repair bay is 3 sections away, through corridors that are now exposed to hyperspace radiation. Varek stepped forward. Your Majesty, I cannot allow you to. You cannot stop me, Commander. Her ears shifted to a position Jake was beginning to recognize as royal stubbornness. The ship's bioneural network requires my direct interface to coordinate repairs. Without the Queen's neural pattern, the repair systems cannot access their full capabilities. Jake looked between them, his brain working overtime. Wait a minute. You're talking about walking through radiation that would cook us like microwave burritos, right? The metaphor is disturbing but essentially correct. But the ship's living, right? Biological systems, organic corridors, the whole bit? Queen Lyralii nodded. The Dawn is a hybrid biomechanical organism, yes. So what if we don't walk through the corridors? What if we go through the ship instead? Varek's ears tilted backward in confusion. Through the ship? You mean? The maintenance conduits, Jake said, grinning despite their situation. Every building, or in this case, living spaceship, has guts. Pipes, wiring, circulation systems. There's got to be a way to get from here to there without taking the scenic route through Radiation Central. The ship's voice whispered in his mind. Asterisk the human speaks truth sense. Bioconduits exist for circulation and maintenance. Narrow passages, but possible, asterisk. Queen Lyralii's ears perked forward. The arterial network. Of course. The ship's circulatory system connects all major sections. Arterial network? Jake asked. Please tell me we're not about to crawl through alien blood vessels. The ship's circulation system carries bioelectric fluid, not blood, she explained, already moving toward a wall panel that dilated at her approach. Though the experience may be claustrophobic. The opening revealed a tunnel that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence, its walls rhythmically contracting like the interior of a vast throat. It was just wide enough for a person to crawl through, assuming that person didn't mind the walls occasionally trying to swallow them. This looks like the world's most disturbing water slide, Jake said. The circulatory system will transport us to the repair bay in approximately 6 minutes, Queen Lyralii said. However, the ship must temporarily reduce circulation to accommodate our passage. Small warm mind, asterisk the ship's consciousness touched his thoughts, asterisk this will cause me discomfort. But the alternative is death for us all, asterisk. A spaceship with self-preservation instincts. I respect that. Jake stripped off his dress uniform jacket and handed it to a startled Varek. Well, Your Majesty, after you. I've always wanted to be digested by a friendly alien spaceship. Queen Lyralii's ears tilted in what Jake was learning to recognize as suppressed amusement. Your ability to find humor in potentially fatal situations is remarkable. It's either laugh or scream, and screaming takes too much energy. They entered the arterial tunnel together, Jake trying not to think about the fact that he was crawling through what amounted to a living creature's bloodstream. The walls contracted rhythmically around them, and bioelectric fluid that glowed like liquid starlight flowed past in gentle currents. So, Jake said, because talking helped keep his mind off the surreal intimacy of their situation, on a scale of 1 to completely insane, how crazy is this by normal Zealothy standards? There are no normal Zealothy standards for this situation, Queen Lyralii replied, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. Royal protocol does not cover emergency evacuation through arterial networks. Good to know I'm breaking new ground in diplomatic stupidity. They crawled in companionable silence for a moment, the tunnel's bioluminescent walls casting shifting patterns of light across their faces. Jake found himself studying the Queen's profile, the elegant curve of her ears, the way her silver hair caught and reflected the organic light. Can I ask you something personal, he said. Her ears tilted toward him. Define personal. What's it like being the only member of your species who has to make all the big decisions? I mean, humans share the misery around. We've got committees and councils and at least 3 different groups arguing about everything at any given time. Queen Lyralii was quiet for so long that Jake wondered if he'd overstepped some cultural boundary. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. It is lonely, she said simply. Every choice affects millions of lives across dozens of worlds. Every decision I make echoes through generations. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be just. Lyralii. Not Her Majesty, not the Queen, just myself. You know, Jake said carefully, where I come from, we have this radical concept that even queens are allowed to be people. Her ears shifted to a position he hadn't seen before, vulnerable, almost shy. Your culture permits such flexibility. Our culture insists on it. We tried the whole divine monarchy thing a few centuries back, and it turns out humans are way too stubborn to worship anyone for very long. We prefer our leaders slightly terrified and definitely human. Terrified? Sure. If you're not at least a little scared of the responsibility, you're probably not taking it seriously enough. The tunnel began to widen, and Jake could see light ahead, the repair bay's entrance. But Queen Lyralii had stopped moving, her attention focused entirely on his words. You find comfort in fear? She asked. I find comfort in knowing that the people in charge are smart enough to be worried about screwing up. Fear keeps you honest. Arrogance gets everyone killed. They emerged from the arterial tunnel into the repair bay's cathedral-like space, both of them dripping with bioelectric fluid that made them glow like living constellations. Around them, the ship's auto-repair systems hummed to life as Queen Lyralii interfaced with the primary control matrix. Jake, she said, and he realized it was the first time she'd used his name without his title. Thank you. For what? Almost getting us killed in your ship's digestive system. For reminding me that queens are allowed to be afraid. The repair systems engaged with a sound like singing crystal, and Jake felt the ship's grateful presence in his mind. Crisis averted, diplomatic mission saved, and somehow he'd managed to have the most honest conversation of his life while crawling through an alien spaceship's bloodstream. Just wait until I tell you about human dating customs, he said. You're going to love how terrified we all are of that. Her ears perked forward, and for the first time since he'd met her, Queen Lyralii laughed out loud. The farewell ceremony was supposed to be a somber affair of diplomatic protocol and carefully worded treaties. Instead, Jake found himself standing in the ethereal Dawn's Grand Assembly chamber watching Ambassador Sterling frantically shuffle through his ceremonial speech notes while Queen Lyralii's ears twitched with barely suppressed amusement. The bioneural synchronization readings are unprecedented, Dr. Kalin was saying to anyone who would listen, waving her quantum scanner like a divining rod. The resonance patterns between Captain Reynolds and Her Majesty suggest a compatibility that defies our understanding of interspecies neural dynamics. Jake adjusted his dress uniform and tried not to think about the fact that his brain had apparently been flirting with an alien queen's brain without his conscious permission. Doc, are you saying my thoughts have been making googly eyes at Her Majesty's thoughts? In crude terms, yes. The synchronization typically only occurs between Zealothi who have undergone the sacred bonding ritual. For it to happen spontaneously between different species is, well, it's impossible. I specialize in impossible, Jake said. It's on my business cards. The assembled Zealothi nobility filled the chamber's curved galleries, their ears positioned in various states of curiosity, suspicion, and barely concealed fascination. Commander Varek stood at rigid attention, his expression suggesting he was still trying to figure out whether to arrest Jake or recommend him for a medal. The ship's consciousness whispered in Jake's mind through the neural crown he'd somehow forgotten to remove. Small warm mind, the formal words approach. Are you prepared for the ceremony of departure? As ready as anyone can be for the most important diplomatic moment in human history, Jake replied mentally. No pressure or anything. Pressure creates diamonds and panic. Both are useful in their proper applications, Did your spaceship just give me life advice? The Dawn has grown fond of your chaotic thinking patterns, Queen Lyralii said, appearing beside him with that fluid grace that made every movement look like a dance. She says your thoughts taste like laughter and lightning. That's either the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me, or the weirdest. Possibly both. Ambassador Sterling finally organized his notes and stepped forward to address the assembly. Citizens of the Zealothi Empire, representatives of Earth's diplomatic mission, we gather today to commemorate the successful completion of first contact protocols and the establishment of mutual cooperation agreements between our civilizations. The formal language rolled over the assembly like a tide of bureaucratic politeness. Jake half listened, his attention caught by the way Queen Lyralii's ears shifted position with each diplomatic phrase. Boredom, resignation, a flicker of something that might have been longing when Sterling mentioned the vast distances between their worlds. The treaty establishes trade routes, cultural exchange programs, and joint scientific ventures, Sterling continued. It represents a new era of cooperation between the Zealothi Empire and the human colonies. Very diplomatic, Jake murmured to the Queen. Lots of big words that basically mean, let's be friends and not blow each other up. An admirable goal, if somewhat simplified. The best goals usually are simple. It's the execution that gets complicated. Queen Lyralii turned to face him fully, her color-shifting eyes holding his with surprising intensity. Captain Reynolds, your species has given us something we had not expected to find. What's that? Hope that the universe is not as serious as we believed it to be. Jake felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the ship's bioelectric atmosphere. Your Majesty, your species has given us something we didn't know we needed. Which is? The reminder that there's still wonder out here among the stars. Ambassador Sterling's voice droned on about trade agreements and communication protocols, but Jake found himself lost in the Queen's gaze. Her ears had shifted to that position he'd learned meant she was paying very careful attention to something important. The formal ceremonies will conclude shortly, she said softly. Then our ships will part ways, and we will return to our respective corners of the galaxy. That's how these things usually work, yeah. Unless. Jake's heart did something complicated. Unless what? Unless certain protocols were to be modified. The neural crowns suddenly flared with warmth, and Jake felt the ship's consciousness focusing on them with startling intensity. Around the chamber, the assembled Zealothi began to notice the increasing bioluminescence, the way the organic architecture seemed to pulse with anticipation. "Your Majesty," Jake said, very aware that hundreds of aliens were watching them, "are you about to say something that's going to get us both in trouble?" "Almost certainly." Ambassador Sterling finally reached the conclusion of his speech. "And so we bid farewell to our new allies, with hopes for continued cooperation and mutual understanding." The chamber fell silent except for the ship's rhythmic heartbeat and the soft harmonics of the crystal formations. Queen Lyralii stepped forward, her royal bearing unchanged but her ears positioned in a way that made Jake's pulse quicken. "Ambassador Sterling, Captain Reynolds, citizens of Earth," she began, her voice carrying easily through the vast space. "The Zealothi Empire has indeed benefited from this historic contact. Your species has reminded us that wisdom and humor are not mutually exclusive, that strength can coexist with joy." She paused, and Jake caught the ghost of a smile. "However, there remains one matter of diplomatic protocol that requires clarification." "Your Majesty?" Sterling asked, looking confused. Queen Lyralii's gaze found Jake's across the chamber. "Captain Reynolds, during our time together, you made a suggestion regarding alternative diplomatic arrangements. I believe your exact words were a jest about marriage as a solution to bureaucratic complexity." Jake felt the blood drain from his face, then return with interest. "Your Majesty, that was... I mean, I was joking about the paperwork, not... I didn't mean to imply... You suggested I should marry you and skip the diplomatic protocols." The chamber erupted in startled chittering from the Zealothi nobility. Sterling looked like he was having a small stroke. Commander Varek's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon before he remembered where he was. But Queen Lyralii's ears were tilted forward in unmistakable amusement, and the ship's consciousness was practically vibrating with delight in Jake's mind. "Your Majesty," Jake said carefully, "when I said that, I was making a joke about how complicated interstellar diplomacy is compared to, simpler solutions. I am aware of your intent, Captain. However, in Zealothi culture, when royalty displays visible emotional response to such a suggestion, particularly in front of the assembled court, it carries significant meaning." Jake's mind raced back to that moment, to the unmistakable blush that had colored the Queen's luminescent features. "You mean?" "I mean that according to ancient protocol, my reaction constituted a formal acceptance of your proposal. The silence in the chamber could have been bottled and sold as a sleep aid." Jake stared at Queen Lyralii, his brain trying to process the fact that his terrible joke had somehow become an interstellar incident. "So," he said finally, "are you telling me that I accidentally proposed to the Queen of the Zealothi Empire, and she accidentally said yes?" "There was nothing accidental about my response, Captain Reynolds." The warmth in her voice, the forward tilt of her ears, the way the ship's bioluminescence seemed to pulse in rhythm with Jake's heartbeat, suddenly it all clicked into place. "You're serious." "I am always serious about matters of the heart." Jake looked around the chamber at the assembled aliens, at Sterling's apoplectic expression, at Commander Varek's slowly dawning comprehension. Then he looked back at Queen Lyralii, this remarkable woman who ruled an empire and laughed at his jokes and had just upended centuries of diplomatic protocol because she'd blushed at his ridiculous suggestion. "Well," he said, grinning despite the magnitude of what was happening, "I guess this saves us a lot of paperwork." The Queen's laugh rang through the chamber like crystal bells, and the ship's consciousness flooded Jake's mind with pure joy. "Small warm mind and queen heart," it whispered. The universe approves of this chaos harmony. Very good. Very strange. Very perfect, asterisk. Ambassador Sterling fainted. Commander Varek began what sounded like either a prayer or a very creative string of Zealothi profanity. And Jake Reynolds, diplomatic envoy turned accidental fiancé to an alien queen, decided that sometimes the universe had an even better sense of humor than humanity did. "So," he said to Queen Lyralii as the chamber erupted in celebration around them, Want to grab some coffee and figure out how to explain this to both our species? I thought you would never ask. Her ears were tilted forward in pure happiness, and Jake realized that somewhere between the terrible jokes and the emergency crawl through an alien bloodstream, he'd found exactly what he'd never known he was looking for. The stars, it turned out, were full of surprises.